Thank you very much. And we're jumping directly to the speakers, and because we have not so much time and we have now really great experts today here to a very important topic. And the host of today is Marlene Mortler, member of the European Parliament, and she is also a vice chair of the delegation for relations with South Africa, DEWE Committee Shadow Rapporteur on Farm to Fork Strategy for a fair, healthy and environmentally friendly food system, and Agri Committee Shadow Rapporteur on a new EU-Africa strategy, a partnership for sustainable and inclusive development, and of course, chair of SME Connect Agriculture, Food and Consumer Working Group. Thank you very much that you're here with us today and that you are hosting this important topic. And I want not to speak too much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Heiss, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers of today's event. I'm pleased to open today's event as a member, you heard, of the Committees on Agriculture and Development. The issues of food production and food security are particularly close to my heart. My personal vision, and this must also be the goal, is food sovereignty in poor countries. Better nutrition and, above all, enough food for all are important to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I don't know of any country that is on track to achieve these World Food Goals by 2025. This pains me personally. The corona crisis has doubled the number of people facing acute food insecurity from 135 million in 2019 to 256 million people in 2020. The nutritional status of vulnerable groups has further deteriorated due to reduced availability of fresh fruits and vegetables. Micronutrient deficiencies keep those affected trapped in a cycle of poverty. Deficiencies cause cognitive deficits and problems with learning, which lead to lower incomes later in life. Women, children, and young women in low and middle income countries are particularly vulnerable. To improve this and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, cost-effective programs and investments need to be designed. The European Union is committed to tackling all forms of malnutrition and supports a multi-sectoral approach to improving nutrition by combining interventions from different sectors, including agriculture, health, water, sanitation, hygiene, and education. Together with dietary diversification and supplementation, food fortification is part of a broader package to address micronutrient deficiencies. Food fortification with micronutrients is one of the strategies identified by the World Health Organization as effective in reducing deficiencies. It was identified by the Copenhagen Consensus as one of the 3 international development priorities. Several EU member states are already investing in food fortification, including the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in my country, Germany. There is a large financing gap in the production of micronutrient fortified foods, especially in low and middle income countries. This should be closed through increased public investment. This shows that the production of agriculture and food products and the resilience of food systems need to be strengthened worldwide. Food fortification offers opportunities to contribute to better nutrition outcomes. The food industry is constantly developing new products. In Germany alone, 40,000 new products are added to the 170,000 established food creations every year, and just as many disappear again because space on supermarket shelves is limited. Culinary novelties that are sustainable or plant-based or offer additional health-oriented benefits currently have good sales prospects. At Anuga, the leading trade fair for the food industry that ended in Cologne in October, for example, 2,000 of the approximately 4,600 exhibitors specialized in organic food, regional products, and fair trade. The EU Farm to Fork strategy and the new EU Africa strategy are good foundations for the issues of food production, food supply, and supply chains in Europe and worldwide. Fair value chains, regional and local supply chains, nutritious and healthy food, prevention of food crises are more important today than ever. The question is, how are we going to enforce this together in line with UN Sustainable Development Goals? There is a strong interest in supporting new nutrition supportive investment instruments that can be applied in the agri-food sector. For example, more investment in research and innovation in the food sector is urgently needed to reform global food systems. I'm therefore very much looking forward to today's discussion and warmly welcome our distinguished speakers. My thanks to SME Connect for supporting this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mortler, to give us this perfect overview of the different aspects we have to discuss today. What fortified food can do for health, what is also in the market, because I think this is also important to discuss. What is the role of Europe, what we can do, and what Africa can do by themselves, and how we come fast to results, especially because the corona crisis shows us that supply chains are short and disrupted. And I think now we're starting directly with the keynotes and starting with the European Commission with Fadoj Shauki, Nutrition Policy Officer, DG INPA, from the European Commission. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Art, and thank you, Mrs. Mortler, for your really good speech. As Art says, I'm working at the European Commission, actually in the International Partnership Commission. And as Mrs. Marlene Mortler said, we are deeply engaged in the food systems transformation, which is actually embedded in the Farm to Fork strategy itself, being under the Green Deal. At the European Commission, in the past 7-year cycle, because we work on cycles of 7 years periods, we were engaged in fighting stunting, fighting this kind of malnutrition. Of course, we worked also on other kind of malnutritions, but we really focused on stunting. And now with the coming new cycle of 7 years, starting this year, 2021, and ending in 2027, we want to broaden our focus and work on all forms of malnutrition, including, of course, macronutrient deficiencies. And we do believe that food fortification is actually a very efficient and good tool to fight the micronutrient deficiencies. We believe that to do so, locally producing fortified food is key. It will provide locally really good nutritious food for the ones who are deficient and in need of vitamins and minerals. Because as Mrs. Mortler said, having this kind of malnutrition for the most vulnerable people, it keeps them in the cycle of poverty. In the first 1,000 days of a child, which start from day 0 when he or she is conceived, the baby in the womb of his or her mother, until 2 years, it is very crucial to have vitamins and minerals. Otherwise, the cycle of malnutrition is already starting and is very hard to tackle if you do not work on this particular period, and making sure that not only children but also their mothers get the sufficient micronutrients is key to tackle malnutrition for the whole population, and to give them all the, I mean, at least a part of the tools to be able to participate in their own in the development of the country, including education of the children. So I was telling you that for us, we do believe that locally producing fortified food is key. And that's why we truly believe that SMEs, so the private sector, is a key actor, a very important actor in the food system transformation. We encourage SMEs to go on our fight against malnutrition and to go for food fortification. We, as I said, we would like to encourage them, and we would like to go forward in this commitment with the SMEs. Yes, that's my final word. I would like to encourage SMEs to go for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that you give also this perspective, what the Commission is doing in this 7-year circle, and that you link the nutrition factor not only to survive, for health, it's also a factor for prosperity and growth. So this means we are not only trying to it's not only a health issue, it's also an economical issue. And I think this is very important to mention, and that SMEs are key. I think we will hear more later also about this, because I think there's also a question how SMEs from Europe can cooperate with SMEs in Africa. And I think this is also something we will discuss later. Thank you very much. And now we're coming to our second keynote by Christoph Guyande, Team Leader 2FS Project Food Fortification Advisory Service, London Mills. The floor is yours.
Thank you, host, and thank you, SME Connect, for the invitation of 2FAS. 2FAS is the Food Fortification Advisory Service to the EU, helping the EU in implementing a number of food fortification projects, which I will talk about. Just briefly on the outline, the next slide, I'm going to go back a little bit just to mention what you can show the outline, Steffi, I don't like to call it problem, but what the issue at stake is, which is hidden hunger. We've mentioned about it, but I want to really, for everybody's benefit, to be on the same page about what it is, what opportunities there are to address micronutrient deficiencies, and Marlene alluded to all the interventions that we have at hand. And I'm going to deep dive into the EC-funded food fortification initiatives that 2FAS supports and has been supporting over the past cycle, and really then a call to action for the EU and for SMEs. So next slide. I'm going to start with the problem, and sorry, I prefer to talk about solutions, but there's a point where you need to state what it is that we are going to be discussing today, and why we're conducting and implementing all these interventions, and that is micronutrient malnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, which is also called hidden hunger. You can move to the next slide. The food system, I think we can all agree on this, is not working for all of us. It's working for us in the Western world to some extent, but for vulnerable populations, the food system is not working, and many households are not able to afford a nutritious diet. The constraints, their ability to access a diversified diet or a nutrient-rich diet, it poses them at risk of malnutrition, and in particular a form of malnutrition, which is the micronutrient deficiencies. We refer to it as hidden hunger, which is somewhat a misleading term, because indeed, if I take my example, I am most likely these days deficient in vitamin D, and it won't show on my body, it won't show in my day-to-day activities. But there is a face to hidden hunger, and this is to show on the next slide. In its most severe cases, goiter, neural tube defects, impaired immune systems, which we talk about quite a bit these days, with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic and the deficiencies of our different immune systems. There is a face to hidden hunger in its most severe cases, and I think it's important to realize that these are diseases that were here and scattered around Western countries, and some of them are coming back because we are not investing as much as we should. And countries like the UK recently passed a new law mandating the fortification of flour, back again. And these are all directly linked to micronutrient deficiencies. To put a few numbers, next slide, sorry, into perspective, what it is that we're talking about. We're talking about 2 billion people suffering from micronutrient deficiencies. Remember, we are 7.7 million. So that means a quarter of the planet is affected and suffering from micronutrient deficiencies. We're talking about children, the future of our nations, that are directly affected. 45% of children death are caused by undernutrition. The next slide. The past 3 slides have sort of cast a cloud over the whole morning, but I'm going to share progresses that we've made to address these important health issues, because there are significant progresses that have been made. There are different options at hand. Next slide. And Marlene again mentioned these. There's a number of strategies that can be used to address micronutrient deficiencies. The golden one, if I may call it that way, is diet diversity. But we talked about it. Diet diversity or diversified diet is, your dream world where we all have access to a diversified diet that fills our daily nutrient needs. This can, however, be limited by a number of factors. One is the financial constraints that we saw earlier. Cultural habits. I just recently came back from Madagascar, and there's an area in Madagascar where it's taboo, for example, to eat eggs. Eggs are, a very, very good source of protein that's available throughout the countryside, and yet, it's taboo to eat eggs, so people don't actually benefit from the protein of the eggs that's right there at their doorstep. Food availability, obviously, is a very limiting factor. If you think of the Sahel, where it's very, very difficult to grow anything, and as you will see, we work quite a bit in the Sahel region, the EU, and TUFAS. A complementary option to diet diversification is supplementation. These are, again, for more extreme cases. We're very familiar in the Western world with supplementation of folic acid during pregnancy, or vitamin A supplementation. This is a complementary solution, and another complementary solution that I'm here to talk, and a lot of the colleagues, is food fortification, which can take the form of several forms. So next slide. Point of use, the next slide. Point of use fortification, so the addition of micronutrients directly onto the food. So it's a crossway between large-scale food fortification and supplementation. Large-scale food fortification consists of adding key vitamins and minerals to the foods and condiments that are commonly consumed by the population. You can think of salt iodization, you can think of oil fortification, flour, milk, etc., rice. And there's a nutrient-enriched crops, which some may call biofortification, which is a process that consists of improving the nutritional quality of foods through conventional breeding. Next slide, the slide before, sorry. Food fortification is not a new thing, and it's a good thing and a bad thing, and I'm going to talk to it, I think, in a minute. It's a good thing because it's 100 years old, essentially. It started off in the 1920s with salt iodization, And then gradually, fortification of staple foods has picked up, complementary feeding, etc. So we have a lot of experience that's been achieved. Next slide, Stefan. Over the past century. We have been able to establish that food fortification works, that it's effective, that it's efficient, and that it improves the micronutrient status and health. There's considerable evidence that has been built, and that is the benefit of 100 years. But if I'm more honest, probably 30 to 40 years for large-scale food fortification. What this slide shows is a gathering of the evidence from a systematic review and a meta-analysis review in low and middle income countries following large-scale food fortification. And I'm only going to mention 2 or 3. 34% reduction in anemia from improved iron stores, 74% reduction in the odds of goiter through salt iodization. This is just to illustrate that food fortification, we have the experience, and we know it's safe, we know it's effective, and as Marlene mentioned, we also know it's cost effective. I'm going now to talk about the opportunities that are at hand. So we've seen that food fortification is effective. It's one of the most cost-effective solutions. The figure that is traditionally used is, every dollar invested in fortification generates $27 in economic return from averted disease, improved earnings, and enhanced work productivity. Like you said, Horst, and you picked up from Fadwa's presentation, it's not just a health issue, it's also a social and economic issue. There is one caveat though. Being 100 years old, there's a risk that there could be a sort of a fatigue towards financing this kind of intervention. But I'm going to talk to it. I think, again, we mentioned that, but without adequate and sustained investment in good nutrition, the SDGs will simply not be realized. The ambition to end hunger, and that's mainly captured in SDG 2, will not be achieved. As you can see, there's 12 out of 17 goals of the SDGs that contain indicators that are highly relevant to nutrition. Next slide. Again, we mentioned that, but very few countries are on course to meet global nutrition targets. Despite the possibilities, despite the impact, despite the micronutrient interventions remain underused, if you want. And I said that earlier, but 100 years is a good thing to prove efficacy. It's a good thing to prove effectiveness. It's a good thing to prove safety. However, the risk that we run is that this has been going on for too long, and is it still worth investing in it? We are humans. We like what's new. We like what's shining, and sometimes we're not too enthusiastic about continuing and financing something that's been going on for years. Especially in this COVID era, where a lot of attention, a lot of financing is going away to some extent from nutrition towards health for good reasons or bad. But nutrition is at the root cause of good health, and we have to ensure that we don't suffer from this kind of donor fatigue, if I may call it, and we continue to sustain the investment in nutrition and in food fortification in general. Next slide. I'm going to now talk more about what the EU does and can do together with the private sector, with SMEs, with social enterprises in some countries, and large-scale enterprises. Next slide. The EC, as some of you know, has prioritized 42 countries for nutrition. Yet, out of these 42 countries, only 10 feature food fortification interventions. So there's quite a way to go if we really want to reach scale with food fortification through EU interventions. Next slide. As you've heard from Fadwa, the EU has committed support quite extensively over the past 7-year cycle. 3.5 billion have been committed to nutrition, out of which 42 million euros were committed to piloting food fortification projects. This is a very good thing. We just need to ensure that this continues in the next cycle. As part of the commitment, the EU has included food fortification in its nutrition and food security portfolio. It's developed a guidance note on food fortification, which provides a rationale for food fortification measures in the EU development cooperation. Next slide. Quickly, briefly about TUFAS, the organization that I represent today. TUFAS has been set up by the EC in December 2015 to strengthen the food fortification initiatives launched by the delegations. It's an advisory service funded by the EU and implemented through a partnership between Netherlands and Guyande, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. We have three main priorities. One is to support countries to implement and strengthen food fortification program. 2, sharing knowledge and lessons learned and best practices. And 3, to increase action and political commitment to food fortification at the global, at the regional, and at the national level. Next slide. TUFAS, this is a snapshot of the project that we support and the 8 food fortification projects that the EU has been piloting for the past 6 years. We support 8 countries, 10 countries really: Chad, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, the Gambia, Kenya, Madagascar, Niger, Sudan, and Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. We provide technical assistance when requested by the delegation, and we work with the countries in implementing food fortification program. So our role is really to support the EC and its public and private sector stakeholders to achieve sustainable food fortification programs that are integrated into national food systems. Next slide, and the next one. I want to finish off this presentation by what I call a call to action, but it's really trying to make everybody realize that food fortification is a truly multi-sectorial intervention that requires public and private partnerships to materialize. It doesn't materialize only with political will or only with private sector interest. And I want to just give you an example of a clear illustration of why this is such a multi-sectoral PPP and why that forms the cornerstone of fortification process. And I'll take the example of the vitamins and the minerals that are used in the fortification of foods. The vitamins and the minerals are produced by industries. They are manufactured globally, they are traded globally, they are procured, distributed. So there are a number of different actors within that own supply chain, which is just a limited supply chain of the food fortification chain. The vitamins and the minerals that are traded, there's taxation systems, there's foreign exchange that's required. And the local value chain, the vitamins and the minerals supply chain merges with the national food value chain. So from farmers to industry processors to processed food manufacturers, transporters, wholesalers, retailers, distributors, all the way to the consumers. So our call to the SMEs who are listening is that we need help from SMEs, we need help from social enterprises, we need help from large-scale food industries in financing, in foreign trade and forex management, in product development, in machinery development, even in transportation, in data management, in marketing, in social behavior change, in business development, and of course, in all kinds of innovation around the food value chain. Next slide. Just quickly, food fortification is a solid investment which supports the EU priorities. I think we've heard that from Marlene and Fadwa. The EU is not alone. There are other European donors who are supporting food fortification, and that includes at the EU level, the government of the Netherlands, the German cooperation, Irish Aid. UN agencies are playing a capital role and instrumental role in scaling up food fortification. And the next slide, I want to finish this presentation by saying that there's this international cooperation will be featured at the upcoming Tokyo Nutrition for Growth Summit, which is taking place in a couple of days' time. It will be a key milestone for the global nutrition community. where we expect new fortification commitments from governments, from donors, and the private sector to together continue the work that's been done over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you gave us really a deep data now and an overview about this topic. We have already also questions from the audience. I want only to formalize it in my words. How you are measuring this, or say are there top regions who are very successful with fortifications or food fortification? Do you have such examples where you say these governments are really have after they launch a program really have measures of success, and how you do this, how you see this, how children are becoming more healthier, in which time framework you have to do this? Is over 5 years, 10 years? How you measure this success? And the second part is, how much must be the people involved? Is there also education necessary, or is this also, I think it's a commercial trade fortification, or it's also home fortification, that you are taking actively pills at home? How your experience here, please?
Sure, I can answer to that, but I'm sure Uduak will also want to chime in. How do we measure? Again, I think what is important to realize is that this is something that we've done for decades, and therefore we've in each of the countries that have been implementing it. If you think of flour fortification, there's nearly more than 80, I think, countries that have mandated flour fortification in the world. So it's something that we have built evidence that it is effective, and that it helps in restoring your micronutrient status. So measurement and monitoring is key for all the programs that are being implemented, and that's the role of the government, of course, the partners that are implementing. It's the role of everyone to monitor and evaluate, and not just the one program, but to monitor the evolution, because like I said, and I think that was my main message, when we stop investing and continue monitoring, we see the problems start coming back again, and that's why it's something that we need to sustain over time. Education is key, of course. I want to say the beauty, in a way, of at least of large-scale food fortification is that you don't modify the food that people eat. However, you have to educate them towards, what's a diversified diet, what are micronutrient deficiencies, what are the impact of micronutrient deficiencies and malnutrition, for people to really understand. So education is, and social behavior change are a key element of all the programs.
Thank you very much. And to answer this question, and now we're going to the debate partners, and starting with Uduak Ibeka, Africa Manager of Sun Business Network, member of SM Connect Health and Nutrition Working Group. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Christoph is a very difficult one to follow. It feels like he's said everything already. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Uduak Ibeka, and I'm wearing 2 hats today. So I work for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and I'm the Africa Manager for the Scaling Up Nutrition Business Network. I have slides. Could they be projected at this point, please? Thank you. Right, I'll just give a brief overview of what the Sun Business Network is. Now, the Sun Business Network is a part of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. This is a movement that seeks to end malnutrition in all its forms by working through various networks at the global and national levels. Now you have a donor network, a civil society network, there's a UN network, and of course, there's the business network. Now the Sun Business Network is co-convened by GAIN and the UN World Food Programme. And so you will find that within various countries, the secretariat either sits within GAIN or the UN World Food Programme, or is co-convened on the ground. The purpose of the Sun Business Network is really to mobilize private sector investment in support of national nutrition priorities. We believe the private sector is key to putting in place innovative and sustainable food system solutions to resolving nutrition issues across multiple geographies. Next slide, please. Now, our engagement is largely around three broad pillars. We convene businesses around nutrition issues, we assess their needs, and we try to link those businesses to support providers through partnerships that we have established within and outside the network, and also through our global membership. So the global members that we have on the Sun Business Network have made commitments to provide technical assistance in various areas to SMEs that are members of national SBN networks. We also advocate to business and on behalf of business to ensure that they are operating within an enabled environment. Next slide. Now, this slide shows rather broadly what we hope to achieve by doing those three main activities. So we're trying to ensure that we're able to improve diets. We want to increase access to safe, nutritious foods through encouraging the private sector to invest in nutritious foods, nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive interventions, knowing that this is the sustainable way to go. We have interventions by development partners and governments that are often finite, but most often, if you want sustainable interventions, then the private sector needs to be involved. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide because this is where I'm going to talk about SMEs and food fortification. Now, these three areas are what I would consider critical success factors for food fortification. I won't go into explaining what food fortification is. Previous speakers have already talked about that. But this is specifically for business because they are the ones who will implement whatever fortification standards or guidelines that are out there. And so they need to have an enabled environment. Now, to me, an enabling environment means a level playing ground. It means setting the right standards for businesses to follow. It means getting businesses involved in developing those standards. These standards cannot be developed in a room with just policy makers and development partners because the businesses are ultimately the ones who are going to implement the standards. And so they need to be involved in the development. We also use those opportunities to understand if there will be challenges in implementing these standards and how do we support businesses to overcome these challenges, because we do expect them to comply with these standards. And we also need to think about what tools would be available to support them in achieving these standards. In some contexts, we've had to also support the government to even be able to set the standards, pulling information from public health related data, looking at what the public health issues are on the ground and what kind of specific food fortification interventions should be implemented within those geographies. And then how do we support the businesses? What would be the incentive? Do they require increased access to finance? Do they require technical assistance? This is often very critical, especially for the small businesses who often do not have the resources to invest in in-house food technologists, do not have the resources to establish their own laboratories. And so how do we make this easy for them? Because this is a shared effort and we want everyone to be able to succeed. Do we need to provide incentives such as tax breaks? How do we arm the businesses with public health information to even trigger an interest in research and development for them to try to find innovative solutions to how they would best include fortificants in the food that they're providing to the public without changing what it looks like, without changing what it tastes like, because people like what they like. And no matter how nutritious a food is or a food product is, if it doesn't look good and it doesn't taste good, then we are joking. The consumers will not be interested. And this is where the skill set or the expertise of the private sector comes into play. To also further support the businesses, GAIN has set up a premix facility that makes it a little bit easier for businesses to be able to procure premix. They extended some credit. We try to ensure that it's a competitive process in getting the premix suppliers to bid to be able to supply to the businesses themselves. And then we also encourage premix suppliers to package premix such that it's affordable and available to the smaller businesses. Because when we started working in the food fortification space, we were told that the small businesses don't procure enough to make them interesting for the premix suppliers. But being able to come into that space, encourage some dialogue and think through together with the premix suppliers and the businesses who are the food processors, how exactly can we make this work for the large companies who are procuring in large volumes, and also for the smaller guys who reach the larger majority of consumers. Now, how cost effective is that? We have to crunch numbers. We need to dialogue and convince each party to be able to make the required investment. We've also had to spend time building capacity of laboratories, because this is an entire ecosystem and everything needs to work. From the food processor who is formulating the foods, they need to check the quality of these foods and ensure that it is meeting the standard that has been set by government. Do they have laboratories on the ground that have the capacity to analyze these food products and give them the certificates of analysis that then gives them the confidence to put on their nutrition labeling what they believe is actually in the food? Product analysis can be very expensive. And so being able to do it in a cost-effective way encourages the businesses to make this additional investment. Now I'll move on to monitoring and enforcement. I cannot overemphasize the importance of this component, especially in low and middle income countries. Nigeria is a typical example. We have seen over the years that when monitoring is consistent, compliance is consistent. If the businesses know that the government is checking, they will do what they're supposed to do. When the monitoring slacks, the compliance slacks. And so we need to be sure that we are constantly encouraging the regulators to do what they're supposed to do. And looking at enforcement, now to most businesses, enforcement means sanctions. But over the years, we have come to the agreement that enforcement needs to have a carrot and a stick approach. So you can't just sanction if you have not helped me to achieve what you are asking me to do. If I have challenges, as the regulator, you need to be able to listen to what those challenges are and help me think through with me as a business. How do I resolve those challenges? Are my products being rebagged along the supply chain? Are my competitors not complying with standards? And then I'm expected to make the investment and there's no incentive for me, and we're playing within the same market, trying to reach consumers that are price sensitive and have limited resources. So how do we ensure that monitoring and enforcement is done such that it is a level playing ground for everyone, and that issues along the supply chain are quickly identified and mitigation strategies put in place? Now, going to awareness and demand creation. Now, I do know that when the idea of food fortification was developed initially, it wasn't something that was supposed to be put in the hands of the consumer. So consumer awareness wasn't part of the strategy. It was supposed to be put in the food mandatorily, monitored by the government. It was supposed to be put in the food such that the consumer is not even aware. But things have changed. And over the years, countries have deemed it necessary to invest in consumer awareness. I will give you an example. In Tanzania, we worked with government and schools to introduce fortified school meals through the school feeding program. It was very important for us to work with the civil society to educate the school on the importance of utilizing fortified foods, educating the parents of the students so that they could also put pressure on the school to ensure that foods that are procured for their children to consume were fortified. And then also, of course, advocate to the government to put in place the required standards. Now, coming to biofortified foods, there are so many misconceptions around biofortified foods. It's GMO, it doesn't look like what my ancestors ate, it doesn't look good, I don't understand this food. And so there's need for education, and it needs to be done by all parties. It needs to be done by governments, it needs to be done by development partners, and it needs to be done by the private sector. Time and time again, the private sector have said this is not something they can invest in on their own. Demand creation is almost like a bottomless pit, and you never know where it ends with your investment. And so everyone needs to come along on this journey. This is also important because the messages need to be consistent so that the consumer is not confused. You can't have the businesses saying one thing and the government is saying something different. So consumer awareness is very important. We've seen issues where we're trying to encourage home fortification with the use of sprinkles, and people don't understand what the sprinkles are. So we need to use public health systems to educate caregivers. The messages coming out of the public health system needs to be consistent with whatever it is that the businesses themselves are telling the consumer, and has to be the same as what the government is saying. And so demand creation is something that we think is a critical success factor for food fortification. Now, SMEs have the potential to reach majority of populations with fortified foods. And within the Sun Business Network, we do have global members who have made commitments to provide technical assistance to SMEs who are keen to improve the nutritional quality of their foods. So if you're an SME and you're on this webinar, please do not hesitate to connect with us. We are here to support you, and we know that you are a critical player in this race to stamp out malnutrition through food fortification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this was now really a good presentation, shows how important the role of consumers are, of SMEs, of control, what the government is doing, how the market is involved. I think what is for me very interesting is also that 70% of SMEs are reaching out to provide food to low-income consumers. So SMEs are really crucial. And that you also mentioned that they have also a part of to do the role of education about this. Only a question, is this an advantage to say my food has also, my products have also food fortifications there? Is this a quality thing that you say, yes, I buy this because they have this extra things, or is this more critical? What is normally, how to promote this? Is this really a thing where to say, if I'm SME, I have this healthy food, buy it, and what are the costs? Is this the same price, or is this more expensive than normal, than unprepared food? Please proceed, Fu.
So yeah, so the businesses also always want to know how does this give me an advantage? If I'm doing something extra, I should be able to tell my consumers about it. This is what differentiates me from my competitor or from other products that are also in this market. And so yes, the businesses do want to invest in educating the consumer and putting those messages on their labels, but this has to be done responsibly. And this is where we try as much as possible as a Sun Business Network to guide businesses that we work with on nutrition communication, what they can and cannot say, what kind of claims can you make, and are these claims in line with what is allowed by the government? You can't suddenly say that someone who's blind is suddenly going to be able to see because they've consumed your food that is fortified with vitamin A. So the messages need to be guided and need to be controlled. And yes, in some cases, because the quality is better, the food might be slightly more expensive, but then it's an investment that has returns in saving costs in the expenses that you would have made in health, going to the hospital, in eliminating fatigue and productivity in the workplace. So when you weigh the cost, the trade-offs, then it balances itself out ultimately.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we're coming to the next speaker, Ronald Afidra, from the African Network Coordination from Food Fortification Initiative. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I do hope everybody can hear me well. It's quite difficult to talk in areas of fortification, especially after renowned speakers have given a keynote, and Uduak has already summarized most of the things, but as it's a debate, I'll not be able to have a structured way, but I want to filter in a few key issues. FFI is a public-private partnership. I work to represent FFI within Africa. And the work we basically do is funded through agencies. We've got some financial support from the Dutch government, and that came through GAIN. And this has been under the Smarter Futures. And we get some funding from, of course, GAIN itself, WFP, and other partners within Africa, within the globe. FFI, we do have 3 critical areas that we focus on. Our mandate is on advocacy efforts towards food fortification across the region, the globe. The second issue we are competent in is support for technical assistance. Our technical assistance is focused through the planning for fortification programs. If you want to plan any fortification program across, we do have that expertise. And of course, implementing it, the program sustainable in each country or wherever country is of focus. And of course, as Uduak has said, providing monitoring tools or monitoring aspect of the fortification program. That is key to us, and that's where we do focus on. And of course, the last area of our focus is tracking and sharing the global progress of food fortification. And we have a database, and Bill and Belinda Gates has been supporting us on providing this input together with GAIN. And that said, my role is to coordinate the work within Africa, and we do have other regional coordinators. I do not work alone, I work with every other person. But now that said, I want to get into what in our perspective food fortification is. WHO 2006 defines it as a micronutrient intervention that addresses a public health need that is demonstratable in the public. That means the health outcomes could be public having VAD, vitamin A deficiency, or we have some evidence of anemia or iron deficiency in the population, or we have an evidence of folic acid deficiency in the ways of manifesting itself in neural tube defect. And food fortification is trying to use micronutrients to increase on the intake of this population group, so that we do hope that the intake can be converted or utilized by the body, and the body can be able to fight these deficiencies, and we have a reduction in these deficiencies among population. But at FFI, we majorly focus on industrial food fortification. I want to agree together with Dr. Marlene Motter, the keynote addresser, who really candidly said that fortification is a complementary intervention. We do have other interventions. So when we are talking here of fortification, it is not a bulletproof alone.
It's 1 o'clock.
We have other interventions. Even WFP alluded to that. So this is the focus of my argument, that we complement other initiatives by other programs. And our focus from FFI is the industrial fortification. Why do we focus on industrial food fortification? When we do have biofortification by the agriculturalists there, when we do have supplementation happening, when we do have dietary diversification happening, when we do have health control measures happening being alluded to, we do hope and we do know that it is by evidence that industrial fortification is one of the cheapest interventions from controlling micronutrient malnutrition. Very cheap if you compare it to any other intervention. If you take supplementation, the chain for its distribution is quite costly. And the world economists have alluded to this. Renowned world bodies have again agreed to this, that this intervention should be practiced or implemented by different countries across the globe. And that is the basis why we then focus on which are the vehicles for us to transfer these minerals and vitamins we want to put in. And our focus as FFI or in fortification are wheat flour, maize flour, and rice has come into play. But there are other food vehicles that we've been focusing on as a globe. We have salt to carry iodine. We do have vegetable oil to carry vitamin A. We do have sugar to carry vitamin A. These are very important because we do know that they are processed centrally. And it means if they are processed centrally, the private sector that is mostly large scale can be able to absorb some of these costs of acquiring and doing all the fortification into the ongoing costs of their food fortification program. The second aspect of it is that as a FFI or as food fortification, we do believe it only works when it is mandatory. If it is a mandatory program, that means we have legislations in place, we have regulations in place, we have standards in place, and these are passed by national bodies, and they are monitored for. Vis-a-vis voluntary fortification, it becomes a little bit easier for us. We've demonstrated success in this when programs are mandatorily done, and that calls for government ownership of this. The third aspect of our success for industrial food fortification is based on the fact that food fortification should be owned by a country, by the owners of the government. And this can only work through a coordinated multi-sectoral organization. Many people have given it names, either National Fortification Alliances or multi-sectoral alliances, or whichever way. But in that we need leadership, the leadership being provided for by government. If there's no political will, it may not be able to work because it is anchored on premix, which is in African context, mostly imported outside Africa. And people believe there are myths associated with that. People believe that if there's a foreign thing being put in our cultural traditional food, government needs to have a say in it. So our perspective is that there should be strong national fortification alliances. But as we talk now, these systems have been affected by the COVID, and this has been alluded to. And if the National Fortification Alliances have not been meeting, most meetings in Africa, if they are virtually done, we do not have the infrastructure, the internet, the computer, whatever you want to say, for the countries to continue working virtually on. So the last 1.5 years and 2 years of COVID has affected and impacted the National Fortification Alliance or the coordination mechanism. The other aspect of a successful program of national fortification program or food fortification is the fact that there should be an evidence. The evidence is from the need. We cannot be able to implement a fortification program in a country where there are no deficiencies. The deficiencies are a guiding principle for us to implement a food fortification program. And where that need is, then we come to address the need. But other evidences are already alluded to by our former speakers. Now I want to get closer to my small debate by asking a few questions that I want to give the answers to. Has the fortification program in Africa been successful? And how long does it take? Because this was the question that you raised. How long does it take for a program to have an impact? I want to give 3 examples. One is the fortification program in South Africa, where folic acid was one of the vitamins put into the premix. We have documented evidence that when the South African program started under the support of GAIN, and they were doing it correctly, the neural tube defect incidence reduced after some 5 years when there was a pre-evaluation done and a post-monitoring exercise done. And that's already documented. It means within a space of 5 years, if consistently is being done and monitored, have a reduction in the incidence of neural tube defect. That was documented in South Africa. But thereafter, there was a relapse of the program in South Africa. And hence, we're trying to work together with South Africa to ensure that there is compliance which is sustained. And then another program that I want to share with you is the program of Malawi. Malawi started implementing vitamin A fortification of sugar. Within 3 years, VAD reduced to about 3% among, from about above 15%. So this demonstrates that if fortification is done well, monitoring is done well, compliance is sustained, we are bound to have an impact in our intervention. The last one, of course, an example is my country, Uganda. Uganda started fortification of oil with vitamin A. And within a spell of 15 years of doing oil fortification, VAT reduced among children and women from 38.9 and 49% to below 9 and 18 over a spell of 15 years. So the programs are dependent on each one, they are dependent on how big the deficiencies from the start of the intervention and how we're able to maintain quality along the chain or along the years, and how best we can be able to document for the impact. The second last question I want to address is, people say, I heard that we need local produced SMEs to now get into fortification. Africa has the key food vehicle as maize. I want to give that as an example because it is locally grown and this is a local commodity vis-a-vis wheat, which is basically imported into this country. Maize flour is majorly produced or processed in small scale mills. And therefore, if most of the SMEs in Africa wants to do industrial food fortification using maize, and that becomes a complex issue. The complexity is arising from the fact that one premix, which is imported in this country, one of the presenters shared, is imported. And how can this premix retain its quality, be taken into all the SMEs across the region? Distribution of premix is the key thing, which affects our which affects fortification of our SMEs across many African countries. And then, of course, quality. Quality control and quality assurance is a very key parameter in the SMEs of local processed or produced food commodities if you want to increase food fortification across Africa. I know time is fast spent, and I want to end with the question on compliance. My understanding of compliance of fortified foods is shifting a little bit because there has been an argument on quality assurance versus quality control by the industry. For a food product to be said safe and has met the quality parameters, that is determined by a regulatory agency, that is government. And the government focuses on figures, on numbers. And the numbers are coming from the standards or from the legislation or from the regulation. Now, these numbers are derived from equipment. These equipment are used for quality control, for analyzing sampled products. And oftentimes we've had technical discussions on whether we need to use figures to come up with the compliance of this product so that we can give an assurance to our public, or we need to have quality assurance practices by the industry. And this goes back to the documentation. This goes back to their cleanness. This goes back to GMP. This goes back to record keeping. And of course, we're trying to say if there's a premix reconciliation program that the industries are applying to infer compliance, then the food industry can be able to progress well. Compliance and quality control is affecting the progress of food fortification by the private sector because one, it is costly, they do not have the equipment, and then two, most time it needs an external support. I want to end with this question that how long shall we have donors fund food fortification program? Can the food fortification program be sustained without donor intervention across the region? Because if it becomes donor dependent, how long can the sustainability be done across Africa, across the world, across everywhere? Or if the donors are pulled out from our food fortification program intervention, will it continue? And we've seen this during the times of COVID. Some countries the programs have come down, and some countries are trying to struggle. So that is where I think I need to summarize with the donor funding question. If there are no donors to support food fortification program, can the micronutrient deficiency intervention, as we're fighting hidden hunger, be correctly done by the countries without any support? Or what else should we do different as we move forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very interesting intervention, and I have to say it's a very practical approach. You say how to introduce standards and compliance, and if you're speaking about SMEs, they're very small, and how to control, how to invest in this. I think these are all questions who ending then also in financing, and in the end also what is the role of the government and what is the role of bigger industries. And now we're coming to Lee Kyunkel-Kuehler, Vice Chair of the Health Product Association HPA of South Africa. And please, the floor is yours.
So in the interest of time, I'm Lee Kyunkel-Kuehler. I represent the interests of Herbalife Nutrition, as well as the Vice Chair of the Health Products Association of Southern Africa. I also wear two hats, and both are in the private sector. One is a company, i.e. my company Herbalife Nutrition, which is a global nutrition leader with experience in nutrition, and of course combating worldwide problems of poor nutrition, obesity, and an aging population, as well as taking into account skyrocketing healthcare costs, and of course from a trade association, private sector industry perspective in the health and wellness space, the Health Products Association of Southern Africa. It's very interesting that we were speaking about the SME sector. More than 80% of the member companies of the HPA in South Africa are SMEs. We also have a combination of larger companies who also have a role to play as it comes to furthering or advancing the interests of good nutrition across the globe, most notably in developing markets. So I'm going to turn the attention to what's happening in Southern Africa, most notably my country, South Africa. And if one talks about, what the focus needs to be and where the focus needs to be at, we have a triple challenge in South Africa of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. And I raise this in the context of hidden hunger. As you can see, the central defining tenet there is poverty. But if we don't really look at the holistic issues impacting a country like South Africa, we'll never get to a situation or a position where we fundamentally advance the public health discourse from a food and a nutrition perspective in South Africa. So we've got some massive challenges. It's a triple challenge, and we have been confronted with that since the advent of democracy, if not before. So what's happening in South Africa? We talk about the need for food fortification and food as a concept, but we're dealing with this triple burden of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. And at the center of that is this whole notion of food. And when we kind of unpack where the focus needs to be, it's really around food security, food sustainability, and then thirdly, from a priority perspective, nutrition security. So what does food security for a country, an emerging developing market or country like South Africa mean? Well, in the short term, it's about how secure are our food sources. Are we food secure as a country? So it's a very realistic, immediate concern for a country like South Africa. Food sustainability is an add-on to that. It's the next step in the food conversation around how sustainable are our sources of food. And here, this is really underpinned in the long term, medium to long term, from a perspective of innovation and technology to sustain food sources and the types of food we require, given the challenges of South Africa and the Southern Africa region. And then thirdly, if we're grappling with the first two aspects, really where most of our time is spent and priority is spent around food security and the sustainability thereof, very little time is left to actually fundamentally understand and unpack what we require from a nutrition security perspective in South Africa and in developing markets, one would argue. So as much as nutrition security is of utmost importance, at what point will emerging markets and emerging countries like South Africa get to a point where we fundamentally unpack, detail, and define what our nutrition security framework should look like for the region and for South Africa? In the box next door on the same screen, these are the indicators that either enable or prohibit us moving forward in the conversation. And these are real conversation pieces to have. It has both a socioeconomic and a GDP specific impact on developing markets like South Africa. I'm not going to spend time on that. I think it's self-explanatory in terms of what those factors would have on a country like South Africa as it relates to food fortification and nutrition security for the country. Now, as part of the introduction, I really do want to just talk about what food fortification has done for globally and also in the developing markets. And it's really around lowering the incidences of micronutrient deficiencies, commonly referred to as MNDs. And that's important because it speaks to a public health discourse of a country, the public health profile of a country. Most importantly, in 2002, the World Health Report, as delivered by the World Health Organization, identified iodine, iron, vitamin A, and zinc as deficiencies as being among the world's most serious health risk factors. And the 4 key strategies identified to address MNDs are dietary improvement, supplementation, food fortification, and of course, the global public health and other disease control measures. And all of the other speakers, the 4 speakers before me, spoke to this. I'm not going to spend time on this. It's a known fact and we accept that. I want to spend some time on leveraging the supply chain, leveraging the value chain to speak about supplementation, the role and value of supplementation, i.e. targeted nutrition in the fight against hidden hunger or micronutrient deficiencies. Now, the expanding range of fortified foods has been justified by the fact that recommended dietary allowances for many nutrients are commonly not met through normal diet. It requires a serious and strategic intervention, a multi-sectorial intervention, driven and led by governments with the right kind of enabling a regulatory framework to support this intervention, but of course on the ground, supported by industry. And so partnerships on the ground in real time are required in a strategic fashion to achieve the outputs required to combat micronutrient deficiencies, or as we know it, to be hidden hunger. Now, supplementation is part of the solution. It's not an either or. We can't speak about food fortification and ignore the opportunities and the value that supplementation or targeted nutrition has plays in combating MNDs for any country, most notably in the developing world. You need both. That's essentially what I'm trying to say from a private sector standpoint, is that we know what micronutrient deficiencies does to the socioeconomic fabric of any country. It perpetuates the cycle of poverty. And so when one looks at what solution a country requires, you've got to look at it throughout the value chain and the supply chain. From a fortification standpoint, the definition from the World Health Organization is that a process whereby nutrients are added to foods to maintain or improve the quality of the diet of a group, a community, or a population. And that would make sense for governments. But supplementation too has a role to play. This refers to the supplementing of specific vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients to the people of that particular country or cohort in order to address the nutritional deficiencies. And this is also from the World Health Organization. So food fortification is done to prevent nutritional deficiency or improve the nutritional status of people, whereas food supplementation is intended to correct the nutritional deficiencies of those same people. So if you don't see the opportunity of food fortification through the line, and food fortification by design has given rise to food supplementation, we will never get the right kinds of public health outcomes for any country, irrespective of whether you're sitting in the developed world or in a developing part of the world like South Africa. So essentially here, you need both. We need to have the right investment across the value chain and supplier chain in order to ensure that we are combating MNDs for that particular population. It has already been said, the impact of micronutrient deficiencies or hidden hunger on populations, most notably impacting the developing world, and most notably in that impact in the developing world, women and young children are most at risk because of this. And where we're sitting? In lower and middle income countries. But the challenge is that there's a prevailing perception that supplementation is more of a lifestyle trend and not relevant or necessary in combating micronutrient deficiencies. We've got to really spend some time in debasing this myth, because if governments of the world continue to believe that supplementation does not have a formidable and vital role to play in the combating of micronutrient deficiencies, we'll never get to a point where we have the right kind of population outcomes and or country outcomes. So we need to ensure that there's a combination of strategies, an integration of strategies that underpin a country's food fortification strategy, inclusive of supplementation, in order to achieve those desired outcomes. 98% of malnourished people reside in sub-Saharan Africa, 98%. So essentially, in the main, this is an African program, an African issue, and an African challenge. But we are hoping that through the EU-Africa strategy, more can be done, and not just talk shops, but action on the ground, real tangible programs that works across governments, including the private sector, both from a multinational standpoint as well as the SME market, where they have the potential to drive this program within countries, is that we come up with structured programs to undo this statistic. It cannot be that in the year 2021, we're sitting with 98% of malnourished people in developing markets of the world. But the industry is growing. The food supplementation industry in Africa is growing. Here's an example from the Health Products Association in terms of their own research and statistics that shows that more and more South Africans are investing in food supplementation or in targeted nutrition. It has a place. And why are they making this investment? They're making this investment because there's a strain on the public healthcare sector. And of course, their whole idea and intention behind food supplementation is prevention rather than cure. So why add additional strain and pressure to a weak public healthcare sector when you can actually take it and ensure prevention as a consumer of products? But in order to do that, you need the right kind of education and the right kind of access to these programs to drive this compelling opportunity forward. So more and more South Africans are investing in supplementation, and from an industry standpoint, there are more and more of these products coming into the country. More product ranges allows for affordable pricing, and ease of access allows for people to have access to these products. However, what we're finding with governments in Africa, and most notably in South Africa as an example, is that even though this industry is growing and it has a place and it adds value to the food fortification debate, what is happening is that countries are, and the regulators are spending more time on the regulation of fortification and less time on the innovation and the technologies required to advance this for populations of the world. We want a balanced approach. We're not saying don't regulate. We're not saying don't enforce. We're saying partner. We're saying support emerging technologies and industries so that we can drive food fortification and its value chain, inclusive of supplementation, forward in all parts of the world, most notably where it's needed in sub-Saharan Africa. What must we do? Governments need to work side by side and hand in hand with all stakeholders, and supplementation needs to be part of an integrated approach led at a country level. It's got to be country owned. There has to be the right kind of investment at the SME level to ensure that this does not just become a talk shop, but there's real opportunities made available to small and medium-sized players in the industry in countries across Africa and the emerging markets. We also want to ensure that food fortification is not the only tool to address micronutrient deficiencies, and this should be regulated by government. Regulation should be seen as an enabler for growth and development and not prohibitive. Food fortification strategies need to be country and context specific and in line with national laws and international regulations, and they should also align with the global strategy recommendations to reorient agricultural priorities to produce healthy foods and sustainably intensify food production to increase high quality nutrition output. So if you don't have the right balance as, from a protect and promote perspective, protect from a regulatory standpoint, promote in terms of technologies and innovations, we will never get the right kind of balance and outcomes to drive this critical aspect forward. Codex Alimentarius is important at the world level. It harmonizes international food standards and codes of practice to protect the health of consumers and ensure fair trade practices. There needs to be a cross-sectorial approach, which includes and involves the private sector, civil society, bilateral and multilateral agencies, inclusive of regulatory bodies. There needs to be a multi-pronged and sectorial partnering. And again, the EU-Africa strategy is required to drive SDG 2 forward. But why is Codex so important? Because Codex continues to develop and evaluate nutrient reference values for essential nutrients that could be used in labeling, as well as informed consensus on scientific opinion with regards to essential nutrient intake and for the prevention of non-communicable diseases. Number two, Codex has now started work on aligning NRVs for infants and young children, challenging yet, of course, absolutely required work considering overall acceptance of the special role of nutrition in the first 1,000 days of from conception. And of course, Codex is a final point for me as probably the most inclusive model and opportunity from a global standpoint to take all scientific opinions and data into account to ensure aligned consensus. So it makes absolute sense that through the EU-Africa strategy, we utilize this platform to also drive the value and the role of a body like Codex Alimentarius as it relates to furthering and advancing the aspects of nutrition for countries around the world, most notably those sitting in sub-Saharan Africa and or in developing countries. And the final point for me, what must be done is that we need to ensure that through the EU-Africa strategy, that we drive nutrition-based education, come up with specific programs that can be that are implementable and practical and simple on the ground with the right kind of outcomes across the learning spectrum, medical doctors, teachers, instructors, etc. We've got to drive implementation very hard. We've got to hold countries to account, because if we don't do that, we will never get to a point where we have tangible outcomes that positively impact countries from a nutrition standpoint. We've got to ensure that we are capably tracking and monitoring the impact and value over time, and there has to be consequences for countries who sign up to this from the EU-Africa strategy standpoint and then are non-compliant. What are the consequences for those countries? Possible withdrawal of bilateral and multilateral support if specific outcomes are not realized. And I say this because we've got to get serious about this issue. If you want real impact, let's get really serious about holding countries to account that sign up to the EU-Africa strategy opportunity as it relates to food fortification and nutrition. And let's get the desired outcomes we need so that we can grow economies, especially in the developing part of the world. Thank you so much. This is a final slide for me. 11 languages, official languages in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And because time is running, it was a very good presentation, point of view of industry, how compliance, regulation support, how it should work together, and that it's very complex. But we mentioned several times the government, and now we have a government representative. Dr. Manjri, Yukmohan Naidu, Director of Agriculture Biotechnology, Department of Science and Innovation, Republic of South Africa. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to put my slides on and hopefully you can see it. But good morning, everyone. My name is Maneshu Jagmohan Naidu. I work for the Department of Science and Innovation, and I'm actually from the agricultural biotechnology sector. So you might find that a lot of my focus is around innovation in my talk. I'm just going to try the presentation again. I think it should be coming up now. So hopefully you can see it. So thank you very much. I'm just putting it in presentation mode. So as has been mentioned, I work for the government, but I'm also very much looking at implementing the bioeconomy aspect, bioeconomy strategy, and particularly the agricultural aspects of the bioeconomy strategy. So in my talk, I also talk a little bit about, because you cannot talk about nutrition security or even food fortification without looking at what else is happening in agriculture and how this affects what is done and what is not done. And I think in many respects, that becomes the key point for what do you implement and how effective it is. So I think a lot has been said today already about the food and nutrition security challenges in Africa, and particularly in South Africa, we do have these challenges, and particularly it's at household level that we have food insecurity. And I think this is a critical area, and it's largely related to the population that's below the poverty level, which sits at 15%. And South Africa is also one of the 12 countries where the mortality of children below 5 years has increased due to malnutrition. In terms of the policy landscape, and I don't want to talk too much because I'm really not the main advocate for food security in the country. We deal with the innovation that is then administered by various government departments. And there are various instruments attempting to assess and address food security and nutrition by the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, the nutrition feeding programs, the Lima, Litsima, and probably some of you are more familiar with this. It's probably the first time that I'm talking on a platform such as this. Now, despite these policies, and I think I want to acknowledge, because it's also a key departure, if there's no policy coherence, it's difficult to innovate. So there's a lack of coordination across government departments. Everybody's addressing food and nutrition security at different intensities, and they have very different approaches and tenacities to what needs to be done. There's a lack of efficient conversation on food prices affecting access and affordability. So I think this is also a real problem. There are various surveys, and I think this is the critical point for us also. We're coming from innovation. There's no standardized methodology to manage, to measure or monitor food security. So it's very ad hoc surveys. It's not really giving you an indication of what the status is. Where are the communities who have this problem? Where are the people who need the solutions? And I think that's, so currently the HSRC is involved in a countrywide survey on food and nutrition vulnerability assessments, and looking at developing a multi-dimensional index to look at baseline data, because that is a critical aspect for innovation. You need robust information hubs that direct you to where the problem is so that you can innovate effectively. And I think also, and it's been said, consumers are generally not aware of the nutritious choice. Wow. So, and a lot of this has been said, so I'll just go very quickly through some of the nutrition interventions. And some of this work has been done by Prof. Hetty Schoenfeld at the Institute of Food, Nutrition and Wellbeing. It's been said already that micronutrient supplementation is only a short-term solution. It's not really sustainable. If we look, so SA did implement the vitamin A supplementation program since September 2002. And nationally, 20% of children between 1 and 4 years of age have been reported to receive high dose of vitamin A supplementation in the last 6 months. So in terms of food fortification itself, there is available in South Africa fortified cereal. So this is more effective medium to long-term approach. It can be introduced effectively. And we've heard today a lot about what's been done to import these, the SMEs that bring it to the table, and industry that mainly does a lot of this on their own. There isn't that efficient conversation on the what and the how. It also requires processing facilities. There's been a lot of discussion around quality aspects and education, so I won't go into that. In terms of just some of the regulations, so food fortification of salt with iodine became mandatory in 1995. In 2003, fortification of maize meal and white flour and bread and brown bread flour with 6 vitamins, iron and zinc became mandatory. And the SA regulations allow the voluntary use of the food fortification logo in the fortified foods mentioned. So the success of fortification programs depends on nutrient interaction, stability of micronutrients, and the bioavailability. And I think here research development and innovation can really play a role in making a difference and fast tracking some of this. And those partnerships that Lee was talking about also become critical. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about our strategy as to how we think as the Department of Science and Innovation can play a bigger role. Now, prior to selecting the fortificants, there's also aspects around research around affecting stability. Does the processes result in loss of nutrients? And I won't go into that detail. Now, in terms of biofortification itself, when it comes to breeding for improved yield, drought tolerance, insect resistance, South Africa has been an adopter of GM technologies for the last 25 years. But that is not really done, and this is more on herbicide tolerance and as well as increased yields due to the genes for that really support tolerance to heat stress, etc. But the increased, with regards to increased nutritional value of crops and increased nutrients that reduce food insecurity, there's really not a lot of work being done. There's been some work done at the University of Pretoria, and I'll talk to some of the projects we've done more on the diversification, but multi-integrated projects that we have in place. Now, dietary diversification is generally also, we talked a lot about awareness and changes in dietary behavior. So this gives you I'm giving it seems like a lot of this has been talked, so I think you're probably at a disadvantage when you speak at the end, but it brings all of it together to say, and I'll come to, so what should we then do next? Iron absorption, there are a lot of work being done that iron absorption increases when eaten with vitamin C. They're consuming a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, and I think that's also, and the protective role of phytochemicals, that's also been mentioned, and the effects on health. So in terms of food production, a lot of work has been done in promoting production of fruits and vegetables by various institutions. But these techniques tend to extend only to the availability of seasonal fruits and vegetables throughout the year. Now, there are also there's also a lot of work done on dietary diversification of nutrient-dense vegetables to increase various micronutrients intake. With improved technology, vegetable growing can improve the current insufficient micronutrient supply. And there's also various technologies that have been developed in South Africa, such as extrusion technologies in the agro-processing industry, and also these result in the destruction of anti-nutritional factors, gelatinization of starch, increased soluble dietary fiber, and reduced lipid oxidation. Now, in terms of nutrient interventions, perhaps in a summary of what's been done thus far, a lot of this only deals with some of the more immediate challenges in terms of hunger, in terms of supplementation, but the longer term issues really in terms of food production and ensuring that there is also economic access to food through alleviating poverty, through increased incomes. That becomes a critical part of the strategy that really needs to address the challenges we face in terms of nutrition security. In terms of addressing global food systems, there is a need for better governance at national and international level. There's a need to build resilience. And if you look at the FAO report that was released a few days ago on building resilience and economic access, and this talks to really the need to build resilient food systems. It talks to the need to develop these systems and ensure that they are sustainable before you can even start to look at what would you invest in terms of biofortification. And the last report that I really want to make reference to is the UN Summit, which identified 7 priorities and principles for improving food nutrition and safeguarding the environment, and the importance of research, development, and innovation in helping us to do so. So these 7 priorities are end hunger and improve diets, de-risk food systems, protect equality and rights, boost bioscience, protect resources, sustainable aquatic foods, and harness digital technology. And if you go into a little bit more detail, it's really talking to some of the more critical issues: food safety, quality, looking at how we then also ensure that we reduce wastage, because as I said, South Africa is food secure. So what is happening to all that food? We can waste up to 30% of the food that we produce, and that's not being used and that's not being distributed optimally. So I come now to the main focus, and this is my passion in terms of what I do in this space. South Africa recently, in 2019, released its new white paper on science, technology, and innovation. And it's really about looking at how also we support inclusivity, transformation, and partnerships, and to foster an NSI in which creativity, learning, and entrepreneurship can flourish. Now, this white paper, and I think this is really critical for what we're trying to do in the bioeconomy, because we really want to invest in technologies that contribute to socioeconomic impact, that target the marginalized, that support new innovations and technologies, and biofortification would be one of them. Looking at partnering and working together, looking at prototypes and services, looking at training, and I think in agriculture, it's really, and I'll talk to some of it's looking at farmer development support and community upliftment through food nutrition and development programs. And I think that's where there's a critical gap. So in terms of the decadal plan in response to the white paper, this is the South African, this is our theory of change in the new decadal plan in terms of implementing the white paper, which is looking at really how can innovation revitalize agriculture. So, and it's really looking at an innovation driving growth perspective. So while we look at the more advanced technologies of crop improvement and animal improvement, it takes cognizance of the need for bio-innovation, and other colleagues talk to the need to take advantage of our huge diversity, and really look at what are some of the key things, what are the key things we need to do to build these ecosystems, to look at developing value chains, to look at an analysis of where are those communities in that value chain who can benefit from producing nutritional crops. For example, if we look at crops such as sorghum, which are gluten-free, and they are also, and I forget now, but looking at these particular crops, trying to promote them, and looking at how they can also increase nutrition in the diet of those farmers that produce them, looking at the processing aspects. So we've done some work on the soybean food and nutrition program, on Bambara groundnuts, but also a lot of work on uplifting communities through other crops that they grow. So you might grow maize and wheat, but you also need to grow beans, etc. And you need to grow vegetables. So if you look at multi-focused and multi-stakeholder projects that promote this in the same project, you come a lot closer to ensuring that those communities can generate income from the agro-processing technology, that they can also be supported with the skills. And it's also technical skills, not just MSCs and PhDs. It's also entrepreneurial skills that they need. And then the issue of how can we bring in digital technology to provide access to the latest scientifically validated information. And through these programs, it's to increase GDP, support decision support to farmers, support biosecurity, and boost rural economies. And I think that's a critical aspect, and job creation as well. And we think through partnerships with all the relevant role players, including science councils, universities, the private sector, that we can drive a different outcome for the agricultural sector, build that resilience, look at how we can support economic recovery in the post-COVID, in the COVID era and the post-COVID era, but also look at more sustainable systems where there is connected supply chains, etc., traceability, supporting trade, and so a lot of that becomes the focus of our strategy. I have one or two projects that I'm talking to that in terms of where we've
only
done
one project, please. We are running out of time. Super interesting, but one perhaps.
Okay, so I think it's just the last two slides, so I'm going to be very quick. I've mentioned a project on food and nutrition security that involves producing in communities soy milk, soy yogurt, and soy snacks. And this we do with the private sector. We've also done some work on nixtamalization of maize and looking at increased niacin. So these communities were able to produce these baked goods with nixtamalized maize, where their maize had increased niacin, and that they could also sell these goods and generate some income. Because if without income, you cannot buy the right nutritious food. The second, and very quickly, there's a project running, and we've recently had a launch of the project where we brought, in terms of what we call the district model, it's based on looking at the spatial footprint, looking at where the communities are, looking at what crops you can grow, and bringing together these different role players, bringing the districts, bringing the communities together to agree on an approach. And at the recent World Food Day, they launched the program with the cooperatives. And this was in conjunction with the UKZN Centre for Transformative Agriculture and Food Systems. So we're targeting a huge number of beneficiaries in terms of smallholder and subsistence farmers, including looking at development businesses. Now, the key thing in these programs is we're looking at, firstly, which communities, and targeting partnerships that will drive nutrition security. With food fortification, there isn't a lot of work, and unfortunately there isn't sufficient programs out there between public and the private sector to say, let's work on biofortification. It's done very ad hoc. We haven't made much progress in putting vitamin A enriched sweet potatoes on the market, for example. So these become critical, that how would we drive partnership in terms of our innovation? And the last comment I want to make is there's an interministerial committee taking place tomorrow, led by the Department of Science and Innovation. And it's really looking at an innovation compact in terms of how can we ensure policy coherence and certainty related to innovation, the absence of which negatively impacts on business and foreign investment in South Africa. And I think this becomes critical in the context of our strategy in terms of how we could take key programs that support nutrition security and biofortification forward. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think this was very good and shows how complex also the government works on this topic, and innovation is key. And we're coming because time is really running, and I see every speaker is very passionate about this topic, and it's more than it's too less time for what we have to say. But we're coming to the closing remarks by Jeremy Lisoba, Member of the Parliament for the Republic of Congo and SB Connect board member. The floor is yours, please. The political view of this discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Heitz, and thank you to all the panelists. I mean, you know, forget about following on from all of you. I think I have more questions than anything else at this point. Really, I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation, because everybody here has said some incredibly interesting things. So I'll just say a few things about myself very quickly. As Dr. Heitz said, I'm a member of Parliament in the Republic of Congo. I'm also a minority leader in the National Assembly and a member of the Commission for the Environment and Sustainable Development. So this is the approach. This is where I'm coming from on this issue. I can tell you that I can relate to a lot of what's been said, particularly in terms of the challenges posed by nutrition. Congo is facing a very similar situation to, some of the countries that Christoph described. Forgive me for that. The prevalence of undernutrition stands at 38% of the population. Severe food insecurity affects 52% of the population. 52% of women between the ages of 15 and 49, and 66% of children under 5 suffer from iron deficiency anemia, as well as zinc and vitamin A deficiencies. And 19% of children under 5 suffer from stunting. So once again, these are facts and figures that we're familiar with, and we understand the challenges being posed by this. I think I can explain a little bit about what Congo has done and where there's room for improvement. So from an institutional perspective, Congo has joined the Sun Movement in 2013, has been very active at the regional level and the sub-regional levels, creating both a national parliamentary alliance for food security and nutrition, as well as helping to create a regional network of parliamentary alliances for the same issue. We also have a national policy for food and nutrition security, a national strategy to fight micronutrient deficiencies, as well as a national commission for food fortification. So from, let's say, an institutional landscape, there is a lot happening. We are working tirelessly with our technical partners to provide school feeding programs, minimum nutrition packages for pregnant mothers and newborns, because as you heard from the facts and figures, these are among the most affected population groups most affected by MNDs. We are also supporting green classroom programs where children learn about agriculture, and this is something I very much appreciated, Dr. Manshri, what you said in terms of, and many other panelists mentioned this idea that we cannot dissociate the question of nutrition from the question of agricultural development. From a policy standpoint, this is incredibly important. So these are some of the things we've done. I also need to mention the support from the European Union when it comes to supporting our research and innovation facilities, when it also comes to supporting value chain development for cassava and pulses. So all of those have been very important initiatives. Perhaps the most promising initiative that is relevant to what we're talking about today relates to the fortification of cassava flour. I think this was mentioned by my panelists. There's the need to, when it comes to fortification, when it comes to addressing these nutrition issues, the cultural aspects, the dietary habits, as well as the availability of the vehicle that you use for fortification is very important. And cassava is very widely consumed in Congo. So this has been, this is a promising initiative. They want to fortify it with iron, zinc, and vitamin B that's being carried by the FAO, forgive me, and other development partners. The FAO is currently working on standards to normalize the fortification process. Now, I just want to very quickly go back to some of the other interventions that I thought were fantastic. And again, I would be grateful if all of you agree for SME Connect to share your presentations, because again, there's a lot of information and perhaps we didn't have enough time to really go through all of it. I think that some of the things that struck me from the different interventions, Fadwa, Dr. Mortler, and Christoph, you very much, thank you for explaining to us how the EU has been working on this issue. Christoph, thank you for giving us a sort of industry perspective of what is happening in this field, and for very plainly telling us that fortification works. I think this is one of the first takeaways, is that it works, it's cost effective, and if done right, it can be accessible. Woodwork, the implication of the private sector is incredibly important. And I very much like the way that you talked about the ecosystem approach, how we need an enabling environment. We also need the monitoring, the monitoring and the quality controls, as well as the sort of cultural and awareness creation. I think it's very important to look at, as I say, this ecosystem approach, this holistic approach, because these are some of the challenges as a policymakers that we're facing. So one of the key interventions that I'm working on at the moment is a framework law for agricultural development, food and nutrition security. I think I'd spoken to Dr. Heiss and I think Lee about this in the past, and this is an ongoing effort that's been going on for a while here in Congo, because we have huge agricultural potential, but we've been struggling to get the sector off the ground. We still have a lot of challenges to deal with. And today we're understanding more and more the links between let's say the objectives and the ambitions of agricultural development, as well as the imperatives of food and nutrition security, and how that fits into broader health goals and other goals. So again, this ecosystem approach, which was also mentioned in different ways by other actors, I think is very, very valuable and essential in providing lasting, durable solutions to this problem of nutrition. So thank you very much for that. Ronald, thank you for some of the examples that you gave and for showing us how things have worked for you on the ground. I would love to know more about your initiatives. Can very much relate to what you said about the need for clear leadership. I think this is something that Dr. Manchuri mentioned this. If you have many different ministries, many different institutions, each doing a little bit, each in competition to sort of take the lead, you will go around in circles, and this is something we who work with politicians and institutions know all too well. So yes, thank you for mentioning that. Lee, I think the understanding the links between poverty, inequality, and unemployment, the impact on health and wealth, I think that's something we cannot forget. I think it's incredibly valuable. Thank you for mentioning the Codex. I think that is also a valuable resource we should all keep in mind. And your call for tracking and monitoring impact. I think Dr. Manchuri also talked about the importance of data, reliable data. This is something that as policymakers we need, otherwise we are working on problems today based on data dating back 10 years, maybe more. So again, Dr. Manchuri, I think I've mentioned you several times because I think as somebody who works in government, I think a lot of what you said, you summarized very well some of the challenges that are faced. I very much look forward to reading the white paper because it looks incredibly comprehensive and valuable. I hope that it is widely available, I should hope. Yes, I think all that is left for me to say is thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you today. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom and experience with all of us. This has been very valuable. I very much hope that we get more occasions to talk about these issues. I think via SME, I will happily reach out to a number of you, if not all of you, based on some of the things you said, because again, there's tremendous political will in my country to address these issues. And again, fortification, although there are a number of challenges that have been discussed here and they need to be overcome, as well as, and I say fortification, but au sens large, as the French would say, so to include supplementation, to include biofortification. I think every country needs to find the mix that is appropriate for their situation, their culture, their socioeconomic objectives and condition, and I think that's possible if a variety of actors like us are able to share their experiences and to share advice and to build initiatives together. So I had a lot more to say, but I think I'll end it here because I know we're short for time. Thank you again, SME Connect. Thank you again to all the esteemed panelists, Honorable Mortler, Dr. Heitz, Stephanie Offer. Thank you so much, and thank you for your attention.